The word valency comes from the Latin valentia, which means strength, or valere, to be strong. In 1852, Edward Frankland announced his theory of valency, that is, each atom has a certain valency, or capacity for combining with a definite number of other atoms. 100 years later, Lucien Tesnier introduced this term into linguistics and used it in the context of syntactic analysis of a sentence in 1959. When analyzing the sentence, he started with the verb and classified its subordinate into actant and circumstant. He saw a resemblance between the chemical valency and the ability of verbs to bind at most a certain number of actants and called the latter valency. In subcategorization and valency theories, a verb is traditionally considered to be the center of a sentence, and thus the description of syntactic behavior of verbs is a substantial task for linguists. A syntactic lexicon of verbs with valency information is obviously crucial for many tasks within the NLP domain: lemmatization, tagging, word sense disambiguation, and machine translation. In general, valency of language units cannot be automatically predicted, and therefore it has to be stored in a lexicon. The primary goal of the both human and machine-readable valency lexicon is to capture valency of the most verbs. For this purpose, different theoretical frameworks have been developed, for instance, functional generative description, that will be mentioned in the next video. Valency is defined as a property of language units reflecting their combinatorial potential in language utterances. So linguists took this term from chemistry, as we already said, where it means how many electrons are missing from the outer shell. The first linguist to use the term was Charles Hockett in the 1950s, and then later on Lucien Tesnier. Verbs describe events, states, and relations that have a certain number of participants. In this framework, verb is perceived as a center of the sentence, and it takes complements, or so-called arguments, which, together with the verb, constitute its valency frame. So, verb reading generally involves two participants, while verb put generally involves three participants. Smile generally involves one participant. The number of participants is called the verb's valency. So, read has a valency of 2, put a valency of 3, while verb smile has a valency of 1. The participants are referred to as arguments or complements of the verb, like arguments of a function. So, verbs are divided into subcategories with different valencies. Here is how the terminology works. Read subcategorizes for a subject and a direct object. It has two syntactic arguments, a subject and a direct object, and this is the information we would find stored in a subcategorization lexicon. If, apart from syntax, we also want to capture the verb semantics as well, as many valency lexicons actually do, then, apart from marking arguments syntactically, we would also mark this argument as an agent and a patient. The notion of subcategorization is similar to the notion of valency, although the two concepts, subcategorization and valency, stem from different traditions in the study of syntax and grammar. Subcategorization originates with phrase structure grammars in the Chomskyan tradition, whereas valency originates with Tesnier's dependency grammar tradition. The primary difference between the two concepts concerns the status of the subject. As it was originally conceived of, subcategorization did not include the subject, so a verb subcategorized for its complements, object and oblique arguments, but not for its subject. Many modern theories now include the subject in the subcategorization frame. Valency, in contrast, included the subject from the start. In this regard, subcategorization is moving in the direction of valency, since many phrase structure grammars now see verbs subcategorizing for their subject as well as for their objects. A subcategorization frame is a template for filling in the verb's complements or arguments. Subcategorization frames are represented differently in different linguistic theories. Subcategorization frame generally has a list of grammatical relations, as we will see in the Valex lexicon for English. So, smile has a subject, verb read has a subject and an object, and verb put has a subject, a direct object, and indirect object. On the other hand, valency frame has a list of semantic roles and grammatical relations. For instance, we will look into Valex lexicon for English. So, in a valency lexicon, a verb smile would have a subject, which is also an agent. A verb read would also have subject and object, but also agent and patient roles. And verb put would, apart from subject, direct object, and indirect object, have agent, patient, and location semantic roles. Verb has a number of arguments that constitute its valency or subcategorization frame. The question is, to what extent is it true that the semantic content of a verb is marked by the structure of sentences in which that verb appears? It is obvious that there is a strong relationship there. Let's look at the example from the paper written by Fisher, Gleitman and Gleitman in 1991 with three verbs: laugh, smack, and put. The different number of noun phrases required by these three verbs is not an arbitrary choice, but it is semantically determined by how many participant entities the predicate implicates. But this link between syntax and semantics is rather complex. Semantically close verbs will sometimes have different syntax. For instance, we can look at the sentences: Bill substituted a monkey for a horse, or Bill replaced a horse with a monkey, which are two sentences having different syntax. On the other hand, semantically different verbs will often share syntactic realizations. So here we have four sentences with four semantically different verbs sharing same or similar syntactic realizations. The question here is whether examples where semantically close verbs have different syntax and where semantically different verbs have the same syntax demonstrate that surface structures are independent of the semantic ones, or whether they imply more subtle and various relations between these two levels. Opinions on this topic vary. Some authors claim that there is no syntax that is independent of the semantics, and that a surface structure is a completely regular projection of the verb meaning. The others claim that there is a little prediction possible from the verb meaning to the surface structures. Tesnier in 1959 was among first linguists to define valency as the number of arguments that may be bound by an individual verb. A variety of theories exist that characterize the arguments of predicates in terms of thematic roles, such as agent, theme, location, etc. For instance, Gruber, Fillmore, Jackendorf, Cook, etc. Classifications were intended to capture syntactic and semantic characteristics of the respective arguments and verb classes. Fillmore, in his work from 1968, for example, argued for a universal set of atomic thematic roles or semantic roles to capture mainly semantic generalizations and use these to classify verbs according to the case frames they allow. Jackendorf in 1972 defined a small number of thematic roles in terms of primitive semantic predicates and established linking principles to map syntactic and semantic arguments. However, no agreement could be reached on a complete and universal set of thematic roles. Doughty in 1991 introduced a weaker definition of thematic roles, replacing the set of distinct thematic roles with two proto-roles, proto-agent and proto-patient, whose semantics are determined through individual entailments holding for a given predicate and arguments. Now, we have to define the thematic or so-called semantic or theta roles mentioned in the previous slide. Thematic roles are the semantic relations between a verb and its arguments in the sentence. They allow a level of abstraction which can potentially make use of linguistic generalizations. In many languages, agents usually end up as subjects, themes usually as objects, and case marking is also sensitive to thematic roles. Datives go with goals or beneficiaries, instrumental case with instrumentals, accusative cases with patients. Typical thematic roles are agent, patient or theme, beneficiary, instrument, or location. Here we have some examples of thematic roles. An agent acts volitionally or intentionally, so in the sentence Mark ate the soup, Mark would be the agent. A patient role is affected by an action, so in the sentence Mark killed the ant would be the patient. A beneficiary benefits from an event, so in a sentence Mark bought a present for Kim would be a beneficiary. Furthermore, instrument role in the sentence Mark ate the soup with a spoon would be a spoon, while in the sentence the bird sleeps in the cage, the location role would be in the cage. A large percentage of linguists make these assumptions. Human languages are like formal languages. Some sentences are in the set of legal sentences and some are not. A human can act like a machine that accepts legal sentences and rejects illegal sentences. Verb can have both optional and obligatory complements, also called inner participants. Obligatory complements can only occur once with a verb in a single valency frame and cannot complement all verbs. Both optional and obligatory complements are represented by thematic roles. In the sentence Bob sings, Bob is the obligatory argument. His thematic role is agent. There can only be one agent in a sentence. In the sentence Bob sings a song, song is optional argument. Its thematic role is theme. There can only be one theme in a sentence. Even if it is a group of themes, they still share the same thematic role. In the sentence Bob likes, there is the obligatory argument missing in the position of the direct object. An asterisk indicates that a sentence is ungrammatical. In the sentence Bob smiles lunch, there is the argument, thematic role patient, lunch, that cannot complement this type of verb. In the sentences Bob walked all the way from his house, Bob walked to the school, Bob walked all the way from his house to the school along the busy road, we have different optional complements. All the way from his house to the school and along the busy road are all actually optional complements. One is source or direction from, the other is goal or direction to, and the last one is path. Bob is the obligatory argument. His thematic role is agent. Locations, times, manners, and other things that can go with almost any sentences are called adjuncts or free modifications. Adjuncts appear with all verbs and may occur more than once in a single valency frame. They do not affect the grammaticality of the sentence. If they are absent from the sentence will not lose grammaticality. Verbs specify how many arguments they take and also the grammatical functions, semantic roles, and case markings of their arguments. Verbs do not specify the semantic roles, grammatical functions, or case markings of adjuncts. Thematic roles explain what the meanings of these sentences have in common, even though their grammatical relations and subcategorization frames are different. The spoon fills the instrument role. Mary fills the agent role, whether she is the subject or in a prepositional phrase. The soup fills the theme or patient role, whether it is a subject or direct object. Verbs differ in the naturalness of their occurrences in particular syntactic construction. If we look at our two examples, we can conclude that it is natural to say Bill puts the shirt in the drawer, but not so natural Bill smiles the shirt in the drawer. Smile does not permit a post-verbal noun phrase, the shirt. So, Put occurs in structures like NP, V, NP, PP, while smile occurs in structures NP, V. Thus, two verbs are associated with different complements, different subcategorizational frames. The question is the degree to which semantic generalizations accord with these distinctions of subcategorization privileges for verbs. In this example, the number of NPs required for grammaticality corresponds to the number of semantic relational elements, so-called theta roles, arguments, or theta criterion, necessary to spell out the participants in the events described by the verb. Not only the roles, but also their structural positions and type are semantically determined. Bill, agent, appears as a subject, the thing moved, shirt, appears as a direct object, and the location, drawer, appears as indirect object, marked by a locative preposition. Thus, the correlations between verb meanings and sentence structure are no accident in the design of the language. In his generative grammar, Chomsky, in 1981, writing about government and binding theory, says, every noun phrase in a sentence must receive one and only one thematic role, and that the argument structure is preserved on the surface structures. Linguists who accept this theory, for instance Fillmore, Bresnan, Williams, or Doughty, have subscribed to a view that lexical semantics determines the core structure of the sentence. Subcategorization frames allow only argument-taking properties of verbs to be represented in the syntax. Only type and position of arguments are encoded. Only some general semantic properties are encoded in the syntax. Take the distinction between verb slide and verb roll. This has no effect on the number nor type of arguments the verbs will take. Both verbs require a specification of an object that undergoes the motion and allow the specification of the path along which the motion proceeds, and also an external agent that causes the motion. In the examples with verb open, the sense of the verb stays the same, but the meaning of two sentences differs, since the first example expresses the causal agent necessitating an additional noun phrase, while the second example tells what happened to the door. The experiments described in many papers, for instance Gruber's paper, Jackendorf's paper, Talmy, Fisher and Gleitman papers, provide evidence of robust correlations between verb syntax and semantics. A number of distinctions in the subcategorization privileges of verbs were examined and hypothesized to be reflections of semantic distinctions. So spatial verbs are associated with PP or prepositional phrases frames. Mental verbs are associated with sentence complements. Sentence complements are defined as frames in which the main verb is followed by an embedded sentence or verb phrase. For instance, sentences introduced by complementizers that, if, or possessive plus suffix ing. Transfer verbs are associated with three noun phrase frames, while ment and transfer or communication verbs are associated with both three noun phrases and a sentence complement. So, authors have been able to extract relationships between syntactic and semantic structures based on the subcategorization frames. And here you have the references describing the approaches to subcategorization and valency we just described in this video.